Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Terry in 10 minutes. Okay, today we'll be talking about how do we factorize or solve cubic equations or function by factoring x out of the equation. These are cubic equation that does not have a constant, okay? And this is the fourth method for this. Please review previous videos. I've talked about different other three methods, okay? And also, please make sure that you've subscribed, you liked and shared. And if you've not done that, I don't know what you're waiting for. Don't forget to click on the notification bell so that when I post new videos, you'll be the first person to know, okay? And also, in order for you to proceed, like I said in the previous video, there are some topics I will want you to first review, okay? I need you to know how to factorize, so the factorization methods. I have a playlist on the ways of factorizing, so you just go back and watch the videos on factorization. And for factorization, we talked about several types. I talked about common factors. I talked about when a is equal to 1, difference of two squared trinomials when a is not equal to 1. And I also showed you how to use quadratic formula to factorize as well. Also, before you move on, make sure you review factor theorem. I have a video as well on factor theorem, so just go to the playlist and also just click on search factor theorem and you can watch the video. So it's very important that you do this very well. Okay, let's get into it. So let me remind you, okay, just a quick reminder as well. I told you that the general or the standard form of a cubic equation is ax cubed plus bx squared plus cx plus d is equal to 0. Do you understand? So this is the standard form. Okay? So this is the standard form, is ax cubed plus bx squared plus cx plus d is equal to 0. And I also told you as well that this when you have a standard form, the a must never be equal to 0. Okay, so we talked about this, that a can never be 0, so that because if a is 0, you end up having a quadratic equation. And I also told you that the a is the cubic coefficient, b is the quadratic coefficient, c is the linear coefficient, and d is the free term or constant term. So you in the first video in this series, I've talked about all this before. Now, using this method 4, you can only use this method when this d is equal to 0. So this method only works okay, when d is equal to 0. So you can only use this method when d is equal to 0. So that means the standard form will look like this, ax cubed plus bx squared plus cx. So you can see this is when you can now use this method, all right? So this is the only time you can use this method when d is equal to 0. Now, how do you solve this? There are 5 steps, or I'm going to call 5 rules, okay, on what to do. So the steps to take. Now, the first thing you have to do is that you have to ensure that the cubic function has no constant. So that's the first thing you have to do. So you write it in standard form and you ensure that the cubic function have no constant, that is the d is equal to what? 0. So ensure the cubic function has no constant. Okay, so that means the d is equal to 0. Okay, and the only way you ensure it has no constant is after you've written it in standard form. Okay, so after writing the equation in standard form. Okay, so when you've confirmed that the d is equal to 0, the next step is that you then have to then identify the a, the b, and what? C. Because we know that d is already equal to 0. So that means this second step is just a second step to just be sure that there is no d here. Number 3, After doing that, the next thing that you have to do is that you have to factor x out of the equation to give x a resultant quadratic equation. So I'm going to solve a question on how to do this, but what you do in this step is that you factor x out. So you factor x out of the equation. Okay, so when you factor it out, you have x outside and the resultant quadratic equation. Okay, now after doing that, after factoring x out, the next thing that, so you are left with an x and a quadratic equation. Now that quadratic equation, now you then have to then factorize it. So now you then factorize the quadratic equation, or let's put it, you factorize the resultant. So you understand that the quadratic equation I'm referring to is the one from step 3, all right? So you factorize the resultant quadratic equation using any of the following, okay? So you can either use difference of two squares, you can use the trinomials when a is equal to 1, trinomials when a is not equal to 1. You can use quadratic equations. So I've discussed all this method before. So you can say this after using any of the previously discussed factorization technique. So I've talked about all this in the previous video. So that was the reason at the start of the video, I told you to first, before you proceed, make sure you've reviewed how to factorize, okay? So you have to go and look at all the factorization methods. Now, after you're done with that, the next thing is that you then have to rewrite step 3, okay? So the quadratic equation in step 3 with the answer from step 4. So you have to rewrite the quadratic equation of step 3 using step 4 answers. And that is that. So the first thing you do, you ensure that the cubic function has no constant. Then after that, you identify the a, the b, and the c. Then when you're done with that, you then factor out the x out of the equation and give x a resultant quadratic equation. So you're going to get an x, and you also have a quadratic equation. Then you now do the rest step, you factorize, and you write your answer. Okay. All right, so that is that for that. Okay, let's pick an example. Okay, let's pick an example to solve using the steps. So let's assume that you were told to maybe factorize, okay? So we're told to factorize x cubed plus 5x squared is equal to maybe 14x, something like this. And you were told to factorize, okay? Now let's go. Step 1. What do you have to do? The first thing you have to do is that you have to write this in standard form. And remember, the standard form is ax cubed plus bx squared plus what? Cx plus d is equal to 0. But we know the d is going to disappear because d is equal to 0 there, okay? So let's go. So we have x cubed plus 5x squared is equal to 14x. You take 14x to the other side. So you're going to have x cubed plus 5x squared minus 14x is equal to 0. So you can see we have ax cubed plus bx squared, cx, and the d is 0. So that means you can see in this case d is 0. Definitely we can use this method here, okay? Now the next one is in step 2. So let's go to step 2. Step 2 now says we need to identify the A, B, and what? C. So we know now here in this case, our A is equal to 1, our B is equal to 5, and our C is equal to minus what? 14. And there is no D. So now we can also confirm as well that the D is equal to what? 0. Okay? Then the next thing is that we'll now go to the third step, which is step 3. So step 3, what you then have to do, you then have to factor x out of the equation to give a resultant quadratic equation. So you are factoring x out. So let's go back. So factor x out. So we have x cubed minus 5x squared minus 14x. Okay. We factor x out. So x is going to come out. You're going to have x squared minus 5x minus 14. So you can see why I said it's going to give you x and the resultant quadratic equation. So you can see we have the x here, and we have a resultant what? Quadratic what? Equation. Now step 4 said that we then have to factorize the resultant quadratic equation using any of the previously discussed factorization methods. Okay, so let's go. The quadratic equation we have here, that is step 4. Okay, the quadratic equation we have there, we have is x squared minus 5x minus 14. Now, when you factorize this, so this is a trinomial when a is equal to 1. So we've talked about this earlier. So you can go back and have a look at this. So for this, in this case here, we'll look for two numbers that you multiply. That will give you minus 14. And when you add them, it's going to give you minus 5. Okay? So you're looking for two numbers that when you multiply them, it's going to give you minus 14. And when you add them, it's going to give you minus 5. So the only number that can do that is going to be plus 7. Okay, this is minus 5x. So this is plus. So here should be plus. Okay, here should be plus, not minus. Okay, so this is plus. So this is going to be plus as well. So we're looking for two numbers that when you multiply, is going to give you minus 14. And when you add them, it's going to give you 5. So it's going to be plus 5, plus 7 and minus 2. Okay, because plus 7 times minus 2 will give you minus 14. Plus 7 and minus 2 will give you plus 5. So it's going to be x plus 7 and x minus 2. Okay? Then when we are done with that, the next one said we should now rewrite step 3 using the answer from step 4. So we're going to rewrite step 3. So instead of having x squared plus 5x minus 14, we're going to have this instead. So we're going to have from step 3, what we had was x squared plus 5x minus 14. Then this is going to give us what? X. Instead of having this, we're going to have x plus 7, x minus 2. Okay, and this is you factorize. Now, just a quick one. If the question asks you to solve, then you have to do an extra step. Okay, if the question I've asked you to solve, then you have to equate each of these to 0. So that means if it's to solve it, x will be equal to 0, x plus 7 will be equal to 0, and x minus 2 will be equal to 0. You start with the first one, x will be equal to 0. The second one, you take 7 to the other side, so that means x will be equal to minus 7. And this, you take minus 2 to the other side, and x will be equal to 2. So therefore, x will be equal to 0, minus 7, and 2. Now, this only happens if the question asks you to solve for x. But in the example we have here, we're just also factorize. So basically, they want you to leave your answer in this format here, okay? And that is that for that. Okay, so that is that. So the first thing, arrange it in standard form. Then after arranging standard form, you identify the ABC. Then you factor the x out. You do factorization for that, and that will give you the answer we got. All right, so let's pick one more example. So, for example, or the best we can do now, let's say I'll give you this question to solve. So the question is solve for x. Okay, I want to solve for x in this. We have x cubed. All right, x cubed minus 8x squared plus what? 15x is equal to 0. So what I want you to do now, I want you to pause the video and I want you to solve it, then come back and see if you can get the answer, all right? So let's assume now you're back now, all right? You've done the due diligence, you've checked and you solved, and you want to now see that we got the same thing. So I'm gonna follow the steps now. So the first step, we need to write it in standard form. So ensure the cubic function has no constant and you write in standard form. So you can see there is no constant here. So, and it's already in standard form. So it's x cubed minus 8x squared plus what? 15x, okay? The second step is that we need to identify the A, B, and C. So identifying A, B, and C, that is step 2. So the A is equal to 1, the B is equal to minus 8, and the C is equal to 15. So this is just a confirmation that D is equal to 0 because there is no D in this what? Equation. So we can apply this. Then step 3, the next step, step 3, we then have to factor out of the equation to give x. So basically, we're factoring out the x from the equation, so we'll have x and a quadratic equation. So let's go back. Step 3. So we're having x cubed minus 8x squared plus what? 15x. So what is common here? X. We're factoring x out, so we'll have x squared minus 8x plus 15. So as you can see, we're now having a what? A quadratic equation and the x. Now let's go to step 4. Step 4 now said that we then have to factorize that resultant quadratic equation we got using any of the previously discussed factorization methods. So we're going to factorize step 4. The quadratic equation is step 4. And in step 4, we have x squared minus 8x plus 15. So what are we doing? We're looking for two numbers. So because a is equal to 1, trinomial a is equal to 1 here. So we'll have to use the trinomial a equals 1 factorization method. So we'll look for two numbers that you multiply that will give you 15. And when you add those two numbers, it will give you minus 8. Okay? Two numbers that you add that will give you minus 8. And when you multiply, it will be minus 15. And that'll be minus 5 and minus 3. Minus 5 times minus 3 will give you plus 15, and minus 5 plus minus 3 will give you minus 8. So it's going to give us x minus 5 and x minus 3. Step 5, the next thing then we have to do is to rewrite this in that form. So we have the x that was outside. So instead of having x squared minus 8x plus 15, we're going to have x minus 5 and x minus 3, and that is it. Now, if the question I've asked you to factorize, you stop here, all right? But the question here is asking you to solve for x. So we'll have to equate each of these to be 0. So x will be equal to 0, x minus 5 will be equal to 0, and x minus 3 will be equal to 0. So x will be equal to 0. You take minus 5 to the other side, x will be equal to 5. You take minus 3 to the other side, and x will be equal to 3. So that means x will be equal to 0, 5, or what? 3. So these are the three possible answers for x. And that will bring us to the end of that. Okay, so we're done. We now know how to factorize and do factorize cubic functions and solve for x, okay? And that will be that for that. The next one is that I'm going to go straight now to the next topic, how to sketch a cubic graph. Now, the reason why I had to start with factorization, because when you want to sketch a cubic graph, you need to find the x-intercept. And in order to find the x-intercept, you need to know how to factorize, okay? So that was the reason I had to go through all the steps, all right? So that the next video now will be sketching a cubic graph and how do you sketch a cubic graph. So I'm going to see you in the next video and we're going to go straight to that. See you soon, okay?